Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to the Wool and the Forest podcast, episode 15, I believe. Happy New Year, one and all. I welcome you warmly to this podcast. My name is Ducky. I am your host on this channel. You can find me as Wool and the Forest on YouTube, as at Wool and the Forest on Instagram, and woolandtheforest.com is my website. And when it comes to show notes, anything at all that I mentioned during the podcast, whether it's designers or patterns or wool producers or anything I've used, everything will be included in the show notes or in the description box below. So welcome everyone to a brand new podcast episode in a brand new year 2024. I'm wishing you all a very happy new year and hoping that the transition into the new year has been a pleasant and easeful one for everyone. I'm podcasting to you today on this beautiful early January, midwinter, icy cold, snow-covered day in Western Washington out of my little textile studio in the far-flung western tip of Western Washington State in the United States in the Olympic Peninsula, on the foothills, nestled into the foothills of the Olympic Mountains. I live here in a little cottage surrounded by the Olympic National Forest with my family. We are a family of 6 with my husband and my 4 small children, one of whom is joining me in the studio today, actually, my 3.5-year-old. She wanted to join Mama's podcasting session today because she was going a bit head to head with her 18-month-old little brother. My youngest is 18 months and he's starting to get quite vivacious and feisty. And these two were having a little bit of a tussle in the cottage. And I knew they'd be driving my husband a bit insane. So I said, well, you can come and sit with me in the studio as long as you quietly play with your Legos, which is exactly what she's doing now. But when she needs something, I'm here. So here we are on this glorious, absolutely glorious day. It has been the most incredible beginning to the new year. We have been slammed by winter, and I will get into all of that in a little bit of chatter at the end of the podcast. So quickly to let you know what we will be doing in the podcast today, a little podcast outline. We will start off, I keep saying we, but really it's just me and my little 3.5-year-old. I will start off with some finished objects, of which I have 3 to show you, and 2 lovely projects on the needles that have seen me through the festive season at the end of December and into the new year. I have some spinning chatter for you. I know I said this in the previous episode that I'm committing to coming back to spinning, to finding the joy in my wheel again. I'm trying to make time after 3 years of very little spinning because of back-to-back pregnancies and just the hectic pace of being a mother of 4 and homeschooled children and living this very small, quiet life here in the woodland of the Western Washington State. So it has left me with very little time for spinning, but I am getting back into it, and I have some things I want to show you with regards to spinning today. And then we will end up by introducing you to someone very special who has joined me for the last couple of videos I've done on my YouTube. And she's sitting right here on my left. And I'm not sure if it's going to be left when this image gets turned around out of the camera. Is my, oh my, that is very bright. Let me change that. Okay, so I have done my best to cover up this window here, which is giving a lot of light today, simply because there's a lot of reflected light coming from all the snow. We have had such a big walloping of snow, as I call it. Anyway, right here on my left, we have this lovely lady, my iron lady, that I want to introduce to you at the very end of the podcast. My 124-year-old antique sewing machine, which has come into my life through the most fortuitous circumstances and things that have decided about my own processes as a working artist going forward this year when I plan on opening my atelier, my boutique back after, the pressures of newborn baby and nursing. I closed down the boutique for the past year and just focused entirely on my mothering. And towards the middle of this year, as I've informed my Instagram friends, that I will be starting the boutique, at least planning to start the boutique back up again. So, and this lovely iron lady of mine is going to play quite a crucial role in that. And I will talk about all that at the very end. So now that we have a little plan on how to proceed, let's jump straight into the podcast. Now, before we carry on any further, I'd like to introduce you to what I'm wearing today, as we all do. Podcasters always love this. I love hearing when podcasters are wearing their own knits. I like to hear what they're wearing and the name of the patterns and things like that. So I hope you're interested as well. So today I am wearing my finished project from the previous episode. This was what I showed as my finished object. This is the Gjof Icelandic Lopa Pesa from Vedis Jonsdottir, who is one of my favorite she is my favorite Lopa Pesa designer for Istex. And this is an entirely unspun yarn Lopa Pesa. It is knit out of Plotulopi. So Plotulopi on the white background, and Nutiden, the Swedish unspun, for the colorwork pattern on the yoke. And I am also wearing, on the bottom here, I'm wearing a skirt that I made, and I showed on Instagram during a reel. This is actually a upcycling project that I did a while back. This is a pinafore style skirt that I made out of a very old denim skirt that belonged to my mother, and which was the wrong size for me. She had left it behind. She had left it behind here the last time she visited me, and I upcycled it, turned it into a nice little, is it pinafore or petticoat? Petticoat style tied up skirt, which now fits me beautifully and I wear all the time as a layering piece in the winter. So that's my outfit. And of course, my little jingle jangles here are my favorite Sri Lankan peacock earrings that, again, was a gift from my mother. So that's what I'm wearing today. So let's jump straight ahead into the first segment of the podcast, which are my 3 finished objects. Now, the first one, I'm wondering in which order to take these. I think I'll take the small ones first, and then we can finish the finished object section with the very special finished object that I'm just itching to show you today. Here we go. Let's start with the smaller one. So this was a work in progress when I did episode 14, the previous episode of the podcast. I showed you my hand-spun socks that I was knitting for my husband out of my own hand-spun, out of Honer Och Eir, Swedish spinning fibers, the same people who make Nutiden unspun yarn, spun wool. And I showed you that I was making this lovely pair of handspun socks for my husband, and I finished these well in time for Christmas. So he actually got these under the tree for Christmas, and he has been wearing them religiously ever since. In fact, just now I actually had to take them off his feet before I ran into the studio, and he was like muttering under his breath. He's like, oh, taking the very socks off my feet, this woman. So he wears them every opportunity he gets. And these last 4 or 5 days of frigid Arctic temperatures here on the Olympic Peninsula, and the incredible amount of snow and just unbelievable levels of cold that we've been under. He has been living in these. So these turned out so beautifully. There's very little to say about them other than they were just such a joy to knit out of my own handspun. I spoke all about this beautiful fiber, and I believe now, after a little bit of thinking and remembering, that this was actually from an old Swedish breed, and that's why there were so many guard hairs in that fiber that I was spinning it from, and it was spun many years ago. 3, 4 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago, and it had been sitting in my handspun stash for so long. And I decided this year that I want to turn all, actually, towards the end of last year, I decided that I want to turn all my handspun wool into knitted objects and to really pay some attention to my own handspun and make beautiful things out of it. So the first was this one, and look at how gorgeously it turned out. Very simple. I didn't follow a pattern. This was the first time I knit a cuff down sock, and I have enjoyed it so much that I don't think I'll ever knit anything other than cuff down socks. So just just a very plain long tail cast on, which is my favorite type of cast on, followed by a few rows of plain stockinette. That's kind of it's become very much the way I prefer to cast on. It's no fuss. I always add 2 or 3, sometimes 4, depending on the type of wool I'm using, rows of plain stockinette after my standard long tail cast on to add a little bit of give and stretch. And that way I find that the standard everyday, I call it the Elizabeth Zimmerman cast on because that's who I learned it from, makes it work for all kinds of occasions. So just that couple of inches, maybe 3 or 4 inches of ribbing, and a lovely, wonderful, fits him like a glove, slip stitch, heel flap and gusset, and ending up with I think in my last podcast I called it a barn toe, but it's actually not a barn toe. It was a rounded toe that I used for him, where the decreases don't just happen on either side of the toe, but the decreases happen evenly distributed around the circumference of the toe, and they happen very swiftly in the last few rounds of the rounded toe. So it was not a barn toe, but a rounded toe. And it was quite funny reading some of your comments from the last episode and finding out from a few people from the Netherlands, some Dutch viewers, that the reason that perhaps the reason this particular sock construction fits my Dutch husband's enormous feet better than any other sock style that I have knitted for him is because this is apparently a very typically Dutch way of knitting a pair of very Dutch socks. So now I know that knitting Dutch socks is the only way to go for my husband and his rather large Dutch feet. So they are a perfect fit. And he keeps saying, that through the heel, that he feels that they're so much more fitting and solid, and he feels like they're staying up on his feet and his leg, most importantly, than any of the other socks I've knitted. And the wonderful thing about this rounded toe is that in previous toes that I have knitted, always toe up socks in the last few socks that I've knitted for him, I found that his very pointy feet, the front of his feet are quite pointy. The large toe, the big toe, and the second toe would be kind of pressing out through the front of the sock and putting a lot of pressure on that front part of the sock over here. And so he used to wear out his socks very fast through the toe, even before wearing it out through the heel. So this time I noticed instantly that was completely eliminated, that problem with this rounded toe, because it matches the point of his feet, the shape of his feet, very well. So, this is why I love traditions. knitting traditions that come from specific parts of the world where people over generations have figured out the best way to knit certain garments, even the best type of wool to use, the best style of knitting for them in terms of the kind of techniques that are predominant in that particular knitting tradition. And people are so clever, they have figured out how to knit for their body types, for the body types that are most predominant in a given gene pool, in a given area of the world. And when you go back to these traditions, when you go back and do something that is traditional, it works so well. I mean, for my husband, there's no reason for me to knit him any other type of sock, because these three things, the rounded toe, the heel flap and gusset, and just a standard cuff down, works so beautifully. I'm very, very happy with them. Most importantly, he is very, very happy with them, and he's wearing them so much. The wool, what can I say? It's already starting to felt quite well on the soles here of the sock and on the cuff. On the heel. You can see that this wonderful lanolin rich, wonderful wool is starting to felt and strengthen in the very parts where socks usually get weakened by wear. It's been quite magical for me to see. So if I open this up, I really hope you can see all this, because someone mentioned in one of my previous episodes that they wish they could see these things a bit more up close and clearly, and I am going to try to do that. But if the glare is not too bad, you might see that here in the heel portion and here on the bottom of the foot, just before the toe portion, those are the spots where, socks usually weaken a lot. And here it is starting to felt, and that felted area has a lot more strength than the parts of the fabric that are not felted yet and are still, they still feel like knitted. This is starting to get felted and strong. And this is the magic of using real wool, using breeds that have, so much of that natural guard hair that they evolved with. It's just incredible. I've never seen this happen with any sort of commercially bought yarn that I have knit socks with. And it just makes me realize, what is the point? I don't want to knit socks with anything else but my own handspun now, because the result is so over and beyond something, commercially made, that I don't see the point. Although I still have some standard yarns that I do need to get through. And once I do, it'll be all handspun. So this has come out beautifully. I could go on and on talking about this and take up far too much time in my podcast. It's because of the handspun. It's so, so incredibly beautiful. Now, the second finished object that I have to show you today, just keeping an eye on my phone here. The second finished object that I have to show you today has been made out of the leftover of the same handspun that I knitted socks for my husband with. And I knitted a pair of socks for myself. So this was very much my Christmas cast on. So I abandoned all my plans for knitting those beautiful winter bird knit mittens by Nina Pomeranka of A Crafter's Tale. The patterns I mentioned in my previous episode that they were going to be my holiday cast-ons, gave up on all of them, although they will be picked up very soon, because I was so in love with the result of the socks I made for my husband that I had enough left over, as I thought I would, enough of my handspun left over to cast on a pair of socks for myself, much smaller socks, as you can see. And these have given me so much joy to make. I mean, just look at them. They are so luscious, so toothy, so full of life, so full of an essence of being of the earth and being alive that is impossible to get in any wool, even wool, that is over processed and commercially, flattened, as it were. It's just incredible. I have no words to describe how pretty, how satisfying, how utterly lovely this pair of socks is. So the story of this is that I wanted it to be my, oh, that's much better lighting. The lighting in this episode is going to change drastically, I think, because of how low the sun is sitting in the horizon at the moment. So the story of these socks, they were cast on just before Christmas and finished, I think, maybe just after the New Year. And I had, like I said, I had just enough handspun wool left over to make a pair of socks for myself. But I wasn't sure if I would have enough to make it as long as I wanted it. So I just threw all caution to the wind, as I am, as I tend to do, and I cast on anyway. And the construction is, again, very simple. Same long tail cast on, a few rounds of ribbing, and this textured pattern. So I didn't want to make a plain stockinette. I wanted to play with some texture for this sock. And this textured pattern I actually stole from one of my own older sock patterns, sock designs. I'm not a knitting designer, okay? I just sometimes when I love coming up with my own patterns. I love designing because designing is what I do in terms of my line of work. I am a textile artist. I'm a textile designer, and coming up with my own patterns and making my own designs, it comes very, it's like second nature to me. So even in my knitting, I don't treat my knitting any differently. For me, fabric is fabric, whether it's knitted fabric or woven fabric. It's just different mediums, different techniques of working with natural fabric. And for me, all of them are, wonderful ways to play in this incredible field of textiles that I'm so blessed to participate in. So this was designs such pattern I wrote, and it's available actually as a free pattern on my website, and I'll put a link in the description box in the show notes below. And years ago, I knit up a pair of socks for my husband, who at the time was still living in the Netherlands, and I took all the notes and I called it the Armored Viking Socks. And in it, this pattern features a little bit more prominently. And I just took that just to go down the center and only in the center front, whereas in the original pattern, it goes all around in the center front. And so the pattern kind of seamlessly moves down from the ribbing, and then after the heel turn, it tapers off that cabled ribbing pattern, I would call it. So, and I think I wasn't sure at first whether the texture would get lost in the handspun, because the handspun itself is quite textured and quite alive, even though it's undyed. There are these natural flecks of gold. I'm going to try and find a particularly obvious portion where I can show you that. Oh, here. If you can see, there are these lovely flecks of gold in the gray. And, you think about it, this is undyed fiber. And here too, you can see a little fleck of that gold sticking out of the spin there. And it only became apparent when I started spinning that there were flecks of gold. So the gold was sort of in the original fiber, which was not roving, which was not processed in any way. It was, I would call it barely opened sheep fleece, basically. It was just like one step away from being fleece. It was not carded, maybe just slightly combed fleece. And that is the best, that is my heart's desire when it comes to spinning. If I can, whenever possible, I try to spin straight off the locks without touching it at all in any way, not even combing. But if it's barely combed, that is like the ideal spinning fiber for me. And this was like that. And in that enormous fluff of barely combed fleece, I could not see the golden flecks until I started spinning it, and then it started to appear and make itself felt, and you can see how it opens up. And I think these golden flecks were only in one portion of the fiber, because they are more dominant in my sock than they are in my husband's. Maybe the texture of the stitches has something to do with that they look more obvious, because the texture kind of brings out the flecks. Isn't that just wonderful? This is, to me, why knitted fabric or fabric making out of beautiful natural fibers is a lifetime of play, because the sheer amount of combinations with which you can bring things alive, it's just incredible, just changing the type of stitch, changing the texture, changing the gauge, changing a stitch pattern, just tiny little changes here and there, and the result looks completely different. Different aspects of the wool manifest themselves and shine, and in other parts they will shrink back and hide and just kind of play a supporting role, and in other instances it jumps out and says, I am the star. So to me, it's this sock is where this particular aspect of this fiber with the golden flecks just wanted to shine. So beautiful. They fit me perfectly. I will try to put a little bit of footage here of me wearing and twirling about in them, so you can see how they fit me. But for myself, again, exactly the same. Heel flap and gusset worked absolutely beautifully, but I did change the toe because I have the opposite style of foot from my husband. I have a very, very rounded front of the foot, no pointiness at all. And so I went for the barn toe. So this is actually the barn toe, and you can see it. It kind of creates this little wedge of horizontal looking stitches going across the toe there. And the barn toe is worked with decreases, symmetrically on either side, instead of decreases distributed all along the sock. It's only worked at the two ends of the sock. And that gives you a very sort of, I guess, a symmetrical and very gradual and gentle curve at the end of your sock, which is exactly what my toes need, apparently. So there we are. Oh, look, I just found a little bit more. The light was hitting the sock in just the right way, and those gold flecks in the gray. Oh, isn't that just, oh my. Okay, anyway, I'll stop there. And we will carry on to the last finished project. But before we do, I want to check on my little 3.5-year-old here, my little Usha. Usha pet?
It's all done.
Is it all done?
Done.
Would you like some water?
I want to drink my whole water cup.
Okay. Are you tired? Do you want to go back in at all? Or you okay?
I'm okay.
All right. You let me know if you get tired, okay? Okay, Poppet?
These things are so annoying.
Are they really? Okay, let me help you. I'll be back. So here I am. I'm back again. 3 finished objects. That's what we did. And I've actually shown you all 3 of the finished objects. No, I have not. Where is my head today? I think it's the extreme cold. I think I'll blame the extreme cold on what's happening. I have slowed down so much, and to sort of do a very tight podcast episode where you're moving from one thing to the next, quite efficiently, and you're trying to make good time. That kind of energy is difficult to bring to bear on a day like this, where a whole of the thrum of nature is just telling you, to just sit back and take long moments to stare out into the snow, to stare out into the cedars and the Douglas firs, which are just heavy, heavy with snow, and just to stare at icicles outside the window and just to sit and stare. Sit and stare. Or stand and stare if that is your vibe. But either way, it's my whole system is just feeling so much slower, and I hope you're not minding that. I hope you don't mind that. Maybe the episode might be a little bit longer than usual. So now that I've gathered myself, I know that I have one more finished object to show you, and this is the very special one that I've been waiting for. This was also on my needles in the previous podcast episode, and here she is. What has become my new favorite jumper. Okay, everyone I knit becomes my new favorite jumper, but look at this gorgeousness. This is the Chainmail sweater from Elizabeth Zimmerman's Knitting Almanac. And it is why I'm calling this episode an ode to Elizabeth Zimmerman, because she is the woman who taught me how to knit. And the more I knit, the more years pass between that first time sitting in front of an ancient recording on YouTube, looking at Elizabeth Zimmerman knitting in one of those knitting around very, very old recordings, I think from the 1970s, maybe even earlier, that somebody had put up on YouTube. That was when I first discovered knitting. It's when I first discovered Elizabeth Zimmerman, and I learned how to knit from her, and her energy and her no-nonsense and her utter, unassuming, unpretentious nature, which belies, the incredible talent, knitting talent, and incredible ability to teach and understanding of knitting that she had, and the way in which she changed knitting culture and wool culture in the US, definitely. It's incredible, the impact this woman has had on knitting culture and knitting tradition in the United States and around the world. So the more years pass by between that first moment and now this culmination, I think this is like the peak of my Elizabeth Zimmerman-ness, is why I've named the episode an ode to Elizabeth Zimmerman, because the more I go back to her as more years pass as me being a knitter. So here it is. This gorgeous, gorgeous chainmail jumper is finished. I spoke a little bit about it in the previous episode. It has been knit entirely out of unspun, another fully unspun jumper. This is made out of Nutiden, the Swedish unspun from Honer Och Eir. It is held, all the unspun, the various colors of Nutiden that have been used have all been held with a strand of my favorite lace weight, my Icelandic Einband, Icelandic lace weight. So the whole thing has been knitted in a combination, actually, of Nutiden and Einband. And the fabric it has created, I mean, just look at this. Look at the drape of this. Look at the drape. It's so beautiful. It has the most beautiful drape of any knitted fabric that I have made. And the construction was a very standard Norwegian ski sweater style. This is the traditional way in which most of these ski sweaters were made. And Elizabeth Zimmerman has a lot of patterns for this. And it is knitted at a much smaller gauge than I usually knit at. And because of that, it was a labor of love. Not just because it was a smaller gauge, but it was a smaller gauge and me juggling 4 different balls of wool, because I had a dark Nutiden and dark Einband on one side the whole time as I was knitting the body of this sweater, of this jumper, and a light Nutiden, the pink Nutiden, and a light Einband on the other side. So that was 4 different balls of wool that I was juggling, and the finer gauge, and the stitch manipulation that you have to do for these crosses that create the chainmail effect. All of that, and of course changing the colors and blending them upwards, all of that required a lot of care. So it was slow going, but goodness, I am so glad I persevered. I'm so glad I committed to this. I have learned so much from knitting this one sweater than possibly anything else I've knitted. And here is the back neck of the sweater where I made some changes. So in Elizabeth Zimmerman's original pattern, which is in this book. Oh, I'm sorry, I just bumped. I'm trying very hard not to bump my microphone because it makes a lot of noise. But this is this wonderful quintessential Elizabeth Zimmerman book, The Knitter's Almanac. And the pattern for this, or rather, she doesn't call them patterns, she calls them pithy directions, which is very Elizabeth Zimmerman, I think, to call them pithy directions. So the pithy directions for this jumper are in this book, The Knitter's Almanac. And in it is in the chapter from March, and it is titled The Very Difficult Sweater Not Really. So that, here we go. That is the original. And it is a lot longer. I wanted to keep my jumper short. I love crop jumpers. And I knew that in terms of the amount of Nutiden I had, I probably wouldn't have had enough to make a full length jumper. And I wanted to wear this with things like skirts, which I'm tending to wear more and more. And with skirts especially, I find that crop jumpers work so much better. And I find I can move around in them a lot better. But that is the original. And as you can see, it is a very standard traditional Norwegian ski sweater shape with that sleeve, which is steeked, meaning the sleeve opening is steeked and attached, without any neck shaping, shoulder shaping, anything like that. However, me, with my swimmer's shoulders, I was a swimmer for most of my youth. I've been an athlete for most of my life, actually. And my shoulders do not do well without adding some kind of short rows, some kind of shoulder shaping. Give me 1 minute, please. The lighting has once again betrayed us, so I'm going to have to open up the window that I just closed. Here I am again. I hope that has given us a little bit more light. So we were talking about the shoulder shaping for this jumper. And I always have to add some shoulder shaping, or I find that the front of the jumper rides up into my neck far too much in a very uncomfortable way, and the jumper never really feels like it's sitting on me. Same thing happens with these Llama pacers. I always have to add shoulder shaping with short rows at the back. So for this one, I went a little bit more extreme. I wanted to play a little bit and see what would happen if I added a very large chunk. So traditionally, or according to Elizabeth Zimmerman's instructions, the pattern would have just stopped here. And she asks you to bind it off, and then you pick up and knit a little bit of ribbing or whatever, and then it's done. However, for this, I wanted to add a full chunk of short rows at the back. And this is the back that you are looking at. If I stretch it out, you see it's quite a significant amount of short rows that I have knitted for the back. And I picked up stitches all around the neck.
Mama,
Yes, sweetheart. Here I am. I'm back again. I have said my previous viewers will remember that interruptions are a normal part of life here at Wool and the Forest because of all the little ones who need their mama so much. She was a little bit tired of sitting and playing with her Legos, and she wanted to go back in and play with her little brother instead. So I have walked her, tromped her through the snow and ice, and safely deposited her with her father and her little brother. And her older sisters are away at a play date today. So carrying on with the podcast and what I was saying. What was I saying about this jumper now? Oh, little ones, little people have such a way of just bringing everything so sharply into their focus, their mother's, eyes and heart and mind. Everything just goes there, and then to come out of it takes quite a bit of effort. Sort of to jump between the two is a skill that I have been working at mastering, let's say, over the past few years. So I have got some footage for you of me wearing this jumper so you can really see it, to see it in its full glory. But so the big significant change I made to the pattern is adding that quite a large chunk of short row shaping at the neck, picking up stitches all around and only adding, of course, the short rows just at the back there, and just, I think, 2 or 3 rows here to raise the front neck a little bit, but not much. And then I cast off with an I-cord bind off, which you can see here. And it rolls quite nicely. I actually like the fact that the I-cord bind off rolls a little bit and brings the stockinette, the reverse stockinette rather, out. I think it creates quite a nice, subtle, pretty effect. So the way this jumper was constructed is the whole body was knitted first, bottom up, my favorite way of knitting jumpers. Then the sleeves were knitted. I chose not to bring the pattern, the chainmail pattern for the sleeves all the way across the fabric because I was running out of the pink Nutiden, the lighter color Nutiden. So I decided early on that I would just have sort of almost like a forearm pattern. It's about forearm length for me. And same on the other side. And then, so the whole thing is knitted as a tube up to the shoulders. And then before I did the adding the short rows and binding off the neck, I just left the neck stitches on some scrap yarn, some scrap wool, and then finished the shoulders first. So this was just one big tube. Then the shoulders were finished with an exposed 3-needle bind off. So I wanted that ridge that you get usually on the inside when you do 3-needle bind off, but I wanted it at the top, and I think it creates a really nice feature at the shoulder. And I like that it's a little ridged. It gives it a feeling of almost like having a seam, which I love. I love the structure and shape and sort of integrity to a garment that a shoulder seam gives. And I love that, the 3-needle bind off kind of has that strength in it, and having the ridge on the outside makes it almost look a bit tailored. And with the cropped shape, I think it came together very prettily. So there's a 3-needle bind off on both shoulders there. And once that was done and the neck was picked up, knitted up, short rows added, I-cord bind off, then I was able to steek. I cut open the amount of fabric I needed on the body. And for this steeking bit, I followed Elizabeth Zimmerman's instructions to a T. And I find that her instructions for steeking just work every single time. I don't know why steeking seems to have this incredible sort of mystique and like, ooh, anyone who can steek is doing something magic. I have no idea where that has come from in the sort of modern knitting community. Because when I first heard of steeking, of course, it was through Elizabeth Zimmerman. And I have steeked quite a few things since learning to knit from her, even just standard things, not just color work. And she gives instructions for steeking in many of her books. And the Knitter's Almanac is not, I would not say, has the most comprehensive instructions. Knitting Around is definitely the book and the videos where she goes into explaining how to steek something very clearly. And her technique is so simple, works every time, and I have no idea why people are kind of freaked out by it. Basically, it involves running machine stitches. She uses zigzag. I didn't find I needed always to use zigzag. Sometimes you need the zigzag. Sometimes you can just use a simple straight stitch. On any simple, basic, everyday domestic sewing machine, you can use that. And so she has you run a couple of parallel rows of machine stitching on the length of the opening you want to create. So that's the opening. That's the opening for my sleeve to fit in. You run the machine stitches on two parallel, it's a terrible word for me, on two rows, and then you simply cut down the middle of the stitching, creating an opening for your sleeve. In fact, I took a little bit of footage of me doing this, and while I'm talking, it will be inserted, stitched in here somewhere. And then you are left with a beautifully finished edge, which, depending on the kind of wool you use, you can either, whip stitch and finish it off a little bit, but real wool, this is the incredible benefit of using minimally processed wool, and definitely unspun. Unspun and steeking are a match made in heaven. Those fibers are all exposed, and when you're knitting from wool from sheep, from breeds of sheep that give fibers that are naturally clingy and toothy and texture. Those fibers are already have a tendency to want to cling to each other. So nothing unravels. I never feel any kind of sense of when I'm steeking. Probably because I learned it from Elizabeth Zimmerman. I never imbued the technique with any kind of woo-woo or mystique. And because I have always used a very toothy, very woolly, unprocessed knitting wools ever since the very beginning of my knitting habit, I would call it. So, so very simple. And I think more people should definitely try out steeking in this way because it is so straightforward, takes very little time. And unless you don't have a sewing machine, in which case there are lots of other clever techniques for steeking, but this is so quick and leaves no mess. And basically what I did was I inserted the sleeve into the steeked armhole, because you're creating your own armhole. Oh my camera is having a lot of trouble focusing at the moment. It's making a racket too. Okay, so I have fixed that issue. My goodness, this episode is full of interruptions, isn't it? So we were talking about steeking. So I really want to encourage more people to give Elizabeth Zimmerman's steeking technique a go. And once it was steeked, I basically treated the sleeve insertion as I would any time I insert a sleeve into a bodice, even when I'm doing not just knitting, but with sewn garments. I do exactly the same thing. And I whip stitched the sleeve seam, the sleeve head to the opening created. So I think that's another thing I wanted to bring up. I think if we treated knitted fabric as we would any other fabric, at least that's how I tend to do it. And maybe it's easier for me because I don't use superwash wools. I don't use very highly processed wools. maybe it's easier for me to think about cutting into these fabrics. But I think of knitted fabric as any other fabric, and that the joy in working with fabric for me is the ability to manipulate it to the uses, to my needs, and to be able to cut into a knitted fabric and to add other pieces of knitted fabric to it and to manipulate it and to make it look the way I want it to. That is essential part of what I want to get out of knitting. And if I'm using a wool with which I can't do that, for me, it's not worth using that wool or yarn or whatever it is. So I think that's why I naturally gravitate to these very natural, very woolly wools, wools that still have so much of the property of the animal and the earth that wool came from. And the closer it is to Mother Nature, the closer it is to the sheep that blessed us with this wool, I find the more qualities there is that you can exploit in that wool, the more you can do with it, the more you can manipulate it, the more malleability, the more things it can become, and that flexibility that is inherent in real wool makes it easier to treat knitted fabric made out of wool like that as just any other kind of fabric. And so to cut and chop and sew and stitch and seam and do all of that, I just love it. For me, that opens up so many possibilities, so many creative possibilities without any restrictions. So there we go. That's my little 2 cents on steeking and on treating knitted fabric just like any other fabric. So here we will take a quick break while we step away and I twirl around in the snow. I took some footage earlier on before I sat down here to podcast, and you will see this wonderful Elizabeth Zimmerman chainmail jumper in its full glory. So I hope you enjoyed that little romp in the woods here. All that footage was taken just here outside the cottage after we walk away from the cottage up our gravel pathway, which is now completely covered in 3-inch thick of ice. And then on top of that, lots of snow. And that's sort of the area around where our well house is situated. That's where you saw me jumping around in my Elizabeth Zimmerman jumper. So let's carry on very quickly on to what's on the needles. I have 2 projects on the needles, 2 wonderful things that have been keeping me company into the first days of the new year. And one of them was it just came out of a desire to have something very simple to knit while I indulged in all my holiday watching, whether it's movies or series or podcasts or whatever it is. I wanted to have something that I could knit without looking. So I could, look at the screen or look at the book or whatever it is. And I didn't want it to be color work or something which needed me to pay attention. So I cast on another pair of socks. I seem to be going through my sock knitting phase at the moment. Do you have that sometimes? You don't knit any socks and then suddenly you just want, a little drawer full of your own hand knit socks. And for me, I want a drawer full of hand spun hand knit socks. But I had in my stash, because I'm all about, working through my stash first. I had a couple of balls of this beautiful wool that my husband, Arik, had brought back from the Netherlands a few years ago when he was going back and forth here and there. And he got me this wool, which I couldn't find here. It's called Charma Rose or Karma Rose. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but it's absolutely lovely. I'll put the content of the fibers and stuff here on the screen, and of course it'll be in the description box. But the two colors, I came out here just after Christmas actually, and I was looking around thinking I'm about to finish my hand spun socks. I want to have another pair of socks I can cast on immediately afterwards. And I saw these staring out at me, and they were just sitting there next to each other on the stash, and I thought, Gryffindor. I'm mad about Hogwarts and all that entire universe. And these just said Gryffindor socks. And I am a lifelong and very proud Gryffindor. And I was like, okay, I have always wanted a pair of Gryffindor socks. And in fact, as I knit these, I'm thinking I need a wardrobe of Gryffindor things, not just socks. So here is the first of the socks that have been knitted up. Again, not following a pattern, just using my own sort of, intuition. I have not knitted many striped socks, and I find them really difficult. I find the whole situation with the jog really, really difficult to make it look nice, but, I'm not caring too much this time. I'm following, picking up the stitch from the bottom and, knitting it into the first stitch of the next round. That whole thing. I'm doing that to try to make the jog less visible. But even the place where the yarn is broken and you start the next, even that point is a little bit, I find it difficult to make it look very smooth. But it's okay. I'm being relaxed about it. And I'm just enjoying the fact that I will end up with a pair of lovely, incredibly soft Gryffindor wool socks. So just again, cuff down, heel flap, gusset, and barn toe. So very quick, very satisfying, very easy to knit. And I am currently working on my second of the pair. So I've just started with the cuff. And yes, I'm doing the colors in inverse. So this one starts with the gold and this one starts with the red. So, to make sure I have enough of both colors, I'm kind of switching them out. So they look kind of cute. They'll look like that when I wear them. One with a red top, one with a gold top, and the stripes are also going, opposite each other. And the only thing different I did here was that I cast on more stitches for the legs so that the sock goes higher up into my calf, and I decreased very swiftly, and you can see that from the sort of odd shape of the sock. I decreased very swiftly towards the ankle, so there's less stitches being worked across the heel flap, the gusset, across the heel turn basically, and less stitches in my foot than there are on my leg. And it creates for a very odd looking shape when they're not on the feet, but when they're on the foot, it is like a perfect fit. I really, really like that. So I am taking notes with this pair of socks. So who knows? If you're interested, let me know in the comments I do love reading your comments. Let me know in the comments whether you're interested in having a little free recipe for this. And if I manage to take notes and if it looks if it looks good, I'll just pop it up as like a little recipe maybe in the show notes of the next episode when they're finished. So let me know if you're interested in that and I will make it happen. So that is my current on the needles, and then I have another very special project on the needles. Once again, just checking my phone. Oh, apparently my baby really needs mama. That means I probably have to leave again. Yes, I'll be right back. You come across from here and just step over mama's things. Is that enough? Oh, yes. Good girl. Go and play with your Legos. Okay, so I'm back again. A little bit of juggling I'm having to do. My little one is back in the studio now. She decided that she was going to be happier back in the studio with Mama while she's podcasting, and I just stepped into the house to nurse my little baby and come back out again. So I do apologize for all these incredible interruptions. So many today. So quickly moving on. This is the last on the needles project that I want to show you. This is something I've been giving a lot of time to in the last few days, few nights, which is the only time I really have to knit is in the nights when my little ones are asleep. And this is the Floresta jumper by that wonderful, wonderful designer from Spain. Her name is Elena Solier. She's just a darling human being. And this was supposed to be a test knit. I spoke about this in the last episode. This was one of my holiday cast on plans, but I ended up casting on only after the new year in the end. And it is a top down colorwork yoke jumper. And I am not a top down knitter. I really don't enjoy knitting jumpers top down. But for this pattern, I will knit a top down jumper because oh, I wish I could open it out and show you, but oh my goodness, it is the most exquisite yoke. It is this beautiful, deep yoke of a vine of flowers, like roses, almost like wild roses, on a bush. And I can just imagine how this is going to look when it's fully knitted up. It's requiring a lot of my concentration though, because I have only knit yoke patterns like this, like these traditional ones with very predictable repeating patterns, which lead to kind of a very geometric looking designs on a yoke, like traditional Icelandic Lopa paces. But this is a very different kind of yoke design. This is very organic. There are no real, it's difficult to memorize, for me at least. It's difficult to memorize as quickly as I would memorize a pattern like this. And so you have to pay close attention to what you're doing. And there's also a lot of carrying of floats, long floats being carried over. And so you have to pay attention to catch your floats at regular intervals, make sure that you change those intervals in, subsequent rounds. So there's a lot of attention that you have to pay to both the pattern and to your knitting. And so this is very, very careful, very, very satisfying knitting, the kind of knitting that in the end is going to teach you a lot, and I can't wait for what it's addictive. Just wanting to go down to the next round, down to the next round, down to the next round, and to see this beautiful of flowers just opening up. So I am knitting this up in unspun. Again, I'm continuing on my unspun sweaters, my unspun jumpers. So this is being knit again in Nutiden. So the vast majority is Nutiden, and the white is being knit in Plotulopi. So the white is 2 strands of Plotulopi being held double, and the brown is a single strand of Nutiden and a single strand of Einband held together. So I'm very interested to see, once more of the fabric is knitted out, what it will look like, what kind of drape it will have. But the yoke, I think we can agree, is going to look absolutely stunning. So those are my 2 on the needles projects, my Gryffindor socks and this beautiful Floresta by Elena Solier. And I think we have just enough time to do some spinning chatter, but very little. So I think I'm going to have to save the introduction of my Iron Lady here, my very, very ancient sewing machine, for the next episode of the podcast, which I hope I can do sooner so that I have less things to show and I can keep my podcast episodes short. So let's carry on to some quick chatter about spinning. So in many ways, my spinning chatter is actually connected to my knitting chatter, because it has to do with something I showed you in the finished objects portion of the podcast. So here I am hunting for what I want to show you. So right here, I have this is dangling off from my spinning wheel, which is at the back, sitting behind me. This is a center wound ball of single ply that I plied, turned into 2 plies to be able to finish my own handspun socks. So these handspun socks that I knitted for myself, I thought I was going to have enough yarn, but it turned out that for the second of the pair of socks, at the very end, I completely ran out. And on New Year's Eve, I was sitting there without any more wool left to finish my wonderful pair of handspun. And I had this single ball of the same exact fiber that I had spun just as a single ply, because I love spinning single plies, but I also love knitting with single plies. So very, very fortunately, this ball was sitting there. So I ran into the studio and dusted off my spinning wheel, which had not been touched in so long. And this was a spin of necessity. That's what it was. But I'm so happy that it happened, because it has reignited that desire to spin. And basically, I plunked this center wound ball on the floor next to the spinning wheel in the middle of the night, on 31st night, and just plied off, straight off the ball. And what you can see here is actually me continuing to ply off the ball onto the bobbin, because once I felt that I had wound enough 2-ply onto the bobbin, I actually broke the thread, took the bobbin in the house, and knit right off the bobbin and onto my onto my sock. So I did a little post about this on Instagram, where I was laughing about the crazy way in which I knitted up that sock out of handspun. So once I had finished the sock, finished knitting right off the bobbin, I decided that I would just ply up the rest of this center wind ball. And that is some lovely bit of spinning that I've been doing. And that has absolutely ignited my plans for spinning this year. And because I have been waking up my spinning wheel and waking up my spinning dreams, um, I was looking at my other two bobbins that I had and realized that I have a little bit of spinning work that I need to do. I guess you would call these on the bobbins part of the podcast. I have this gorgeous bit of Jacob's wool from our dear Auntie Jan, who is an incredible shepherdess. She raises Jacob's sheep, who are a very special breed of sheep, who are very similar, actually, in many ways to the ancient breeds like the Icelandics. She is our neighbor. She lives very close to us. She's much more than a friend. She's become a part of our family, and I admire her so much. She's one of these incredible wool women, and I learn so much from her every time I'm with her, every time I visit her, every time I see her with her sheep. These beautiful, beautiful herd of sheep that she has, her years of working with them, her years and years of spinning their wool. She's just a treasure trove of knowledge and experience and skill and wisdom. And she gifted me some of her fibers a couple of years ago, and I spun them up last year or the year before. I'm not sure. Probably the year before, because I haven't been spinning. I have, had such a big break from spinning, and I have here a bobbin of slightly thicker single plies and slightly thinner single plies of the same Jacobs. And I think this fiber was from Helen, her most sort of vivacious of all her sheep. She's kind of like the leader sheep of her pack. Of the pack of the group of her ewes. The ewe crew is what Jan calls them. They're absolutely gorgeous sheep. And these are Helen's. This is from Helen. She really is very friendly. She's the friendliest of the lot. And whenever we turn up, or whenever my husband turns up to do some work around the barn or to fix things up in the gates and do some stuff for Auntie Jan, Helen is always the one who comes and gives him a nibble and a cuddle and a hello. So this is Helen's, and it's really beautiful. And she's got mouflon coloring, and you can see some of that popping up there in the spinning. And I think what I've decided is, as soon as I have plied that Swedish fiber that I had started, I will start plying these up, the thicker single ply with the thinner, and just see what I get. Simply because I want to finish and empty up these bobbins and free them up for more spinning. And that spinning chatter I will have to speak to you about in the next episode, because that's where I start to dedicate myself, devote myself this year to processing and spinning up the beautiful, beautiful Jacob's fleece, this entire fleece I have sitting here in the studio, and two stunning Icelandic fleeces also, no more than coming from sheep from an Icelandic breeder about 15-20 minutes away from where we live. So these are the most local to me sheep that I could imagine, and I am so looking forward to reigniting my relationship with spinning this year. And it has already been reignited, because spinning is one of those things that when I start, it is like I have always spun. I think it is even more instinctive to me, spinning, than knitting or anything else that I do with my fingers. And I didn't learn to spin from anyone. And I remember years ago when my husband gifted me a spinning wheel. That's actually, he gifted me a spinning wheel when we were still courting. It was quite amazing. As a surprise gift, it landed on my doorstep one midwinter's day years and years ago. And I remember I sat down and I had a little bit of fiber to spin with. And then instantly I ordered some fiber from Honer Och Eir. And I started spinning, and it was as if I had never stopped spinning. It was as if I had done it my whole life. Memories that were not even my own started flooding into my fingers and into my hands. And I remember showing some of the wool, some of the yarn that I was spinning at the time on Instagram, and many people were quite shocked that this was the first thing I had ever spun on a spinning wheel. And a lot of people refused to believe me that I was an entirely new spinner. And I was like, yes, I am. I didn't look at YouTube videos. I didn't know any of the lingo of the terminology or anything. I just knew the joy of it. I just knew that there was a sensation that settled into my innermost being that could not be expressed in words, and that this was something I had done before, many, many, many times before. And this was something that was rooted in me, and that if I did it, a part of me was ignited that, fed every other part of me. And so it's, I know it all just sounds so crazy, but that's the truth of it. So this is too important for me to just give up on. And I think the time in my life has come back where I can open up little pockets of time to spin again. Baby is willing, of course. So there we are, the spinning chatter, all the spinning chatter we have time for. I had more plans, of course, to show you some of this gorgeous Icelandic spinning that I had done, and that I'd never shown you, but I'm going to have to wait for that. There's a long story behind that beautiful skein that I just showed you of Icelandic wool from Iceland that I spun right off the locks, not even carded fiber. So we can speak about all that in the next episode of the podcast. And I will introduce you to my beautiful sewing machine then. Because of all the interruptions today, I feel like it has taken far too much time. And I think I'll save all this for the next episode, including the giveaway winner. I started a giveaway in episode 14 to celebrate the holidays, and I simply did not have time to run the random number generator today, and to organize all that, and to get all the entrants, all the people who entered the giveaway into the draw. I just haven't had the chance to do it. So I'm going to close the giveaway from today onwards. So I'll go back into that episode and close the giveaway, and I will do the draw and announce the giveaway for the holiday giveaway in the following episode. So please do tune in for that. Thank you so much for joining me, all my returning viewers. I thank you deeply for being here, for coming back to my episodes. I can't believe there are so many of you who care to sit and watch me ramble about my love for wool. This really is a moment in my month that I get to just sit and share in a way that I otherwise don't get to. I love every single comment you leave for me. It's like balm to me, and I respond to every single one. Please feel free to comment throughout the episode as much as you like. I always read them, and I always respond. To new viewers, thank you so much for discovering the channel. I hope you have enjoyed your introduction to wool in the forest, and I hope you will go back and look at older episodes. And the best way to support this channel and to support the making of more podcast episodes, if you're enjoying this work, is to subscribe, to comment, to like, and of course, the incredible amount of gratitude that I can never express to my patrons. You are the true supporters of this podcast. Without the support I get from you on Patreon, I would not be able to podcast with any kind of regularity, because as you all know, the way I live and the amount of people who depend on me, time is a very, very valuable resource for me. So to spend time in this way, podcasting, and to be away from my kids and to invest in this, even though it is an enormous joy for me to do so, it's not something I would be able to do without your support. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me to sit here and to chat to you and to gain so much joy from it. I am so grateful. So I'm wishing you all a wonderful, wonderful beginning to the new year. And I hope that wherever you are, that the winter is treating you kindly, and that if you're having snow, that you're enjoying it, and that if you're not having snow, you're also enjoying that. And I will see you all very soon, hopefully sooner than the last little gap between podcasts. And I hope that in that time that you keep your heart in kindness and that you keep your hands in wool. Yes. And I hope that everything you do is infused with joy for this incredible life that we have all been given. Thank you. Namaskaram. Ayubowan.